Howdy folks, hope you all had a great weekend. I had a pretty good weekend. And welcome to another episode of Mingles.business. So I guess we should get the medical news out of the way first before we get on with the, it's all news I suppose. And there's not really an awful lot to add other than, well, aside from what I mentioned last week when I actually got out of hospital. 100% cancer free, so it's all good. And I'm feeling way better. It's been 2 weeks now since the surgery. Way better, obviously, than when I first got out of the hospital. I'm basically almost 100% pain-free now. The wounds are healing up nicely. I barely need to change the dressings every day anymore. There's only 2 downsides. Well, there's 3. The first one is I'm on laxatives just to reduce the amount of work that my gut has to do, which is good because it means it makes life easier for my gut and makes it easier for it to heal. But it means I'm basically shitting fizzy brown arse gravy all the time. Hey, you know what? Better than the alternative. So that's 1. 2. What was 2? I know I said there were 3. Oh, yeah, that was it. Well, things are still significantly better than they were a couple of weeks ago. I still get really tired really easily. I mean, the day after I got out of hospital, I went upstairs in the morning to make some breakfast, and breakfast is just some Greek yogurt with some frozen fruit and a cup of coffee. And it doesn't take a lot of preparation. I mean, you put the coffee filter on, yogurt in the bowl, fruit in the bowl, done. And that tired me out so much, I had to stop and sit down and catch my breath halfway through making a bowl of yogurt with some frozen fruit in it. It's nowhere near as bad as that anymore. But I just don't have a lot of energy, and I get very tired very easily. Then again, I suppose on the bright side, it's not like the work that I do is physically demanding. But it still takes it out to be sitting down and making these videos. But hey, got to pay the bills, so the videos will continue. Like I said, it could be a lot worse. The third thing, and this is probably the worst, is one of the medications, there's a bunch of medications that I was issued by the hospital pharmacy when I was sent home. And mostly they're fine. You know, the laxatives, various different pills for, honestly, I have no idea what. But there's one thing that I have to take. And it's because when you've had major surgery, for like a month afterwards, you're at significant risk of blood clots. And blood clots can be fatal. You know, they can be bad. Deep vein thrombosis, and all of that stuff. So, I'm on blood thinning medication, which wouldn't be a problem. It's just that how the blood thinning medication has to be administered. You see, I am absolutely terrified of needles, which is kind of unfortunate given that my action station in the Navy was first aid team. But sticking needles in other people was never a problem. It's needles going into me that I have an issue with. Anytime... And obviously, you know, when I was in hospital, they were taking blood all the time and this, that and the other. And if I wasn't sitting down or lying down when it happened, there was an excellent chance I would faint. Right? So I would have to make sure I was seated and not look at it while it was happening. And I could put up with it. As I'm sure you've probably guessed by now, the blood thinning medication comes in the form of an injection. But that's not the worst part. The worst part, I mean, that would be bad enough because I'm absolutely terrible with needles. But the worst part is that you have to inject it into your stomach wall. Oh my God. They couldn't have come up with a worse self-medication for me if they'd sat down and planned it out. Actually, that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that of all of these medications that I have to take, it's like take 2 of these, 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening for the first 18 days. Take 1 of these every night at 8 p.m. for the first week. Over and done with relatively quickly. I have to take these things. I have to inject myself in the stomach with this blood thinning medication every day for 30 days after coming out of hospital. Oh, it's quite easily my least favourite part of the day. But, well, you know, the alternative is potentially dying from a blood clot, so I just have to, suck it up, buttercup, and crack on. But it's not fun at all. Other than that, everything's great. So, anyway, yeah, well, it doesn't suck to be me, because I'm cancer-free, and I'm healing, and I'm better every day, so I get a bit tired, and I have to stick needles into my stomach every day, but other than that, everything's fine and dandy. So, anyway, moving on swiftly, what's been happening while I've been away? Well, I'm sure you're all aware of the drama surrounding Helldivers 2, which was hailed as, well, not quite an independent game. I mean, it was published by Sony, but being published by Sony turned out to be part of the problem. So, quick recap, and I will try to keep this quick because I'm sure most of you were aware of the story. Helldivers 2 comes out of nowhere, takes the world by storm, and deservedly so, because it's a fantastic game. I mean, mad props to the developers. They deserve all of the success that they've had. But there wouldn't be a successful development studio if their publisher wasn't trying to come up with new and interesting ways to screw them over and ruin all of the success and goodwill that the game has generated. Because Sony started insisting that everybody who had the game, and this is for the PC, by the way, obviously if you're going to be playing it on the PlayStation Network, you're going to need a PlayStation Network login. But you clearly did not need a PlayStation Network login to play the thing on Steam, because millions of people have been playing it on Steam without a PlayStation Network login. So the game comes out, massive success, the developers are, and rightfully so, extremely pleased, they've done a fantastic job. And then, after the game's been out for 2 months, Sony announce you have to connect your Steam account to a PlayStation Network account, or you will lose access to the game that you have paid for. Why? Best guess, so that they can turn around at the next shareholders meeting and say, ooh, look at all of these new sign-ups on the PlayStation Network, which is completely unnecessary because people have been and are playing it on Steam, the PC version, without any PlayStation Network login. Completely, 100% unnecessary. So there's massive backlash, and then Sony, because they're completely incapable of reading the room, come out and say, well, we don't understand what all the fuss is about. It takes you 30 seconds to link your account. Well, yes, that's correct, Sony. But, one, it clearly isn't necessary, and two, you've been selling the game on Steam globally. And now you're pulling the rug out from under everybody's feet saying you need a PlayStation Network account. But you've been selling the game on Steam to people in countries that don't have access to the PlayStation Network. More than 170 countries who can buy games on Steam cannot buy games on the PlayStation Network because of more than 170 countries there is no access to the PlayStation Network. So what happens to those people? I'll tell you what happens to those people. Steam starts issuing them all refunds. Massive backlash within the Helldivers 2 community. And there's something that you need to understand about the Helldivers 2 community. These people get shit done. As part of playing the game, the developers would issue these challenges to the community. Things like, I don't know, I'm just plucking a random figure out my arse here. As a community, in order to unlock a certain thing, everybody would have to kill 1 million robots, for example. And this community gets shit done. They do not mess around. They were blasting through these community challenges in record time. Right, this is a motivated community who know how to work together. And oh boy, did Sony soon come to regret that. They fucked with the wrong community. In the space of a single day, the Helldivers 2 aggregate score on Steam went from mostly positive to mostly negative, with more than 200,000 negative reviews in a day. These people get stuff done. Now, my initial reaction to this was, well, one, respect. Two, I feel so sorry for the developers. I mean, because they don't deserve any of this. They're getting shit on, and it's all Sony's fault. I mean, this is your own publisher shitting on you for no good reason whatsoever. This development team are literally handing Sony millions upon millions of dollars, and all Sony had to do was nothing. Right? It's like an episode of the Game of Thrones here. They didn't have to do anything. They just had to sit back and count the money, but they couldn't leave it alone. The developers, of course, they can't say anything about this because it would be suicide for them to come out against their own publisher. But what are they going to do? Well, one of their community managers, committed career suicide by telling everybody that the only thing that they really could do to protest this was to review bomb and ask for refunds, because that's how you bring pressure against the publisher. This almost certainly cost this particular community manager his job, but it was absolutely what I'm sure all of the developers wanted to tell everybody to do, but couldn't, because it would have been suicide for the development team. This is, of course, exactly what ended up happening, and it worked. Like, within a couple of days, Sony completely reversed their decision. You no longer have to have the PlayStation Network account on PC, because of course you don't, you're on PC, in order to continue playing Helldivers. Which means everybody in those more than 170 countries who didn't have access to the PlayStation Network can still continue playing the game that they bought and paid for to play on PC, because of course they can. So, and again, this is a community that gets stuff done within a day. The Steam reviews went all the way back up to mostly positive. Everybody who had left a negative review logged back in and changed it back to positive. So, chalk one up for the community, I guess, and also the developers, even though their hands were tied and there was absolutely nothing they could do about it. So that's everybody caught up on the situation. But it didn't end there. There's more drama. You see, it only appears that Sony have learned their lesson. They, of course, have not. This time it's actually got nothing to do with Helldivers 2. A couple of years ago, when I was still regularly playing games on my PlayStation 4 Pro, a little game came out on PlayStation from the development team Sucker Punch in 2020 called Ghost of Tsushima. Now, this was an astonishingly good game. It was absolutely beautiful and played like a dream. It was, of course, only available on PlayStation. Fast forward 4 years to 2024, wow, that's more than a few years. Fast forward a few years to 2024, and there's a PC port. You already know where this is going, don't you? Yep, that's right. Ghost of Tsushima is coming to PC on Steam in 3 days on May the 16th. And while you do not require a PlayStation Network account for the base game, which is absolutely incredible, and I was actually considering getting this to replay it on PC because it would just be better. You do, however, need a PlayStation Network login for the multiplayer side. Why? It's not like you're going to be playing against people on the PlayStation. It's a 4-year-old game on PlayStation. Nobody's still playing it. This is purely for people playing on PC. Why do you need a PlayStation Network login to play against other PC players on PC? Simple answer, you don't. But Sony just haven't learned their lesson, have they? And this time, while it's not at this point, you know, as I'm sitting down here recording it, it's not 100% absolutely clear who's doing this, but it's probably Steam, because I think it's safe to say nobody likes issuing refunds, and Steam have probably had enough of Sony's shit at this point. When the whole drama surrounding Helldivers 2 kicked off, Steam started issuing refunds and delisted Helldivers 2 for sale in all of those regions where PC players didn't have access to the PlayStation Network. Well, on May the 10th, they also delisted Ghost of Tsushima in the same regions, applying the same purchasing restrictions. And people have already started, without even having to ask for them, they've already started receiving refunds if they'd pre-ordered Ghost of Tsushima. All because Sony are once again, I mean, the fires haven't even burned out from the Helldivers 2 fiasco, dumpster fire, yet. And Sony are once again offering a PC game on sale to hundreds of countries that have absolutely no PlayStation Network access, while requiring that you have PlayStation Network access for a game on PC. This might have something to do with the fact that apparently Sony missed their PlayStation 5 2023 financial year sales targets for the PlayStation 5. And of course, if they get all of these PC players to sign up for PlayStation Network accounts, they can say, oh yeah, look at all of these PlayStation sales. I mean, over half of Helldivers 2 sales in the US alone were on PC. And that's a lot of new totals that they can add to the PlayStation sales with a little bit of creative accounting. But, well, they just never learned their lesson the first time around. It looked like they did. They caved in and removed the PlayStation Network restriction or requirement for Helldivers 2. But it's still there for Ghost of Tsushima. And somebody, and it's looking like Steam at this point, has just had enough of their shit. And now the game has already, even before it's gone on sale, been delisted in all of those countries, and refunds are being issued. Well, in some actually kind of surprising shitty games publisher related news, there is actually some good news this week. I'm not entirely sure why. It seems entirely out of character for Warner Brothers publishers to be doing anything good. Warner Brothers, of course, another publisher that's just notoriously unable to read the room, following the dismal failure of their recent live service project, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which has massively underperformed, basically because there's nothing to do in it, and it's a live service game. I related shortly before I went into hospital for surgery the comical news that as a direct result, you're not going to believe this, just in case you didn't catch it the first time around, but Warner Brothers actually came out and said, as a direct result of the massive failure of their live service Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League game, they were stopping development, which was bad news for the developers concerned, but they were stopping development on basically anything that wasn't a live service game, and were only going to be concentrating on live service titles in the future. You know, your big live service game just failed miserably, right? But, well, you know, what can you do? Warner Brothers are just going to be Warner Brothers. Well, following the news that they were just going to be concentrating on developing live service games after the failure of their latest live service game, this was a bit of a nail in the coffin for anybody who wasn't developing a live service game with Warner Brothers as the publisher. One of these studios was Adult Swim Games. Now, Adult Swim Games haven't actually developed a game in a couple of years, but they did have a couple of titles on Warner Brothers' back catalogue. And again, this is another thing that's blown up in the news over the last month or so, with publishers just deciding that they can't be bothered to keep hosting games that are still earning money, and they're delisting them all and removing your right to continue playing them. And this was something that they were doing with the Adult Swim back catalogue. Initially, they said that they weren't going to transfer ownership to the developers because, let me just find the exact quote. Here it is. They had, and I'm quoting now, made the universal decision not to transfer the games back to the original studios and did not have the resources to do so. Well, the whole didn't have the resources to do so is clearly bullshit. But this raises an interesting point here, and it doesn't just affect Adult Swim Games, but all of those other publishers whose, well, sorry, not publishers, all of those other developers whose games are basically being killed by their publishers, and also has implications for the people who still play those games. Because the publisher can clearly, if they're not interested in making any more money from these games, don't just kill the games, give the rights back to the developers. And the developers can host the games and continue earning a living from them. But in Warner Brothers' initial statement, and it's not just Warner Brothers here, although it is them specifically with regards to Adult Swim Games, but, well, it was quite famously Ubisoft killing off the crew that sparked this whole dumpster fire. But in Warner Brothers' original statement saying that they weren't going to transfer ownership of these games back to the developers who created them, you know, the games that they're no longer interested in actually earning any money from and no longer have any interest in supporting, they couldn't do it because they didn't have the resources to do so. Bullshit. Well, anyway, there's some good news, at least in this particular case. It's not that Warner Brothers have made it, and this is the bizarre thing about it, because Warner Brothers, you know, they made the announcement that they were going to be killing off all these games because they didn't have the resources to transfer ownership back to the game developers. But they have not made any announcement. But the game developers have suddenly found that they've been getting emails from Warner Brothers restoring ownership of the games to the developers. And it's not just Adult Swim Games here. There's a whole bunch of small independent games that Warner Brothers had published, which they were going to unceremoniously pull the plug on, but which the developers have now suddenly found, again, without any great fanfare, with no announcement from Warner Brothers, but the developers have now found that they now, once again, have ownership of the games that they developed, as well as all of the store pages for those games across all platforms. The games aren't going anywhere. And the bizarre thing is, I mean, this is a massive public relations coup for Warner Brothers. I mean, they publicly announced they weren't going to do it, and then they didn't publicly announce when they did do it. It's like, I can only Honestly, my best guess here is that somehow Warner Brothers screwed up and did something right by accident. It's the only thing that makes any logical sense, given what's actually happened. Honestly, you come up with a better explanation. I've got nothing. But it is good news. And I have to say, it is nice to be able to end an episode of Mingles with Jingles with a bit of good gaming news for a change, even if the only possible logical explanation I can come up with for how it's happened is that somehow an evil publisher screwed up and did something right by accident. I mean, I don't know, you come up with a better explanation. One thing that we can take away from all of this is that whether Warner Brothers have done this by accident or not, it has set a precedent. Because they initially claimed that they couldn't do this because they didn't have the resources to do so, and apparently all it took was an email to each individual games developer proving that of course they have the resources to do so. Which is, it's turning into a very, very bad look for all of those other games publishers. Yes, Ubisoft, we're looking at you here, who are killing games and claiming that they have no choice but to do so, when Warner Brothers are demonstrating that is clearly complete bullshit. I'm not expecting Ubisoft to reverse the decision that they've made on all the games that they're killing off, of course. But, I mean, while we all knew it's bullshit, now we can at least prove it. Anyway, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I'm happy to be ending on a spot of good news, at least for anybody who owns any of the small independent titles published by Warner Brothers. They're not going anywhere. You're still going to be able to keep playing them, and the developers are still going to continue to be able to earn a crust from them. So I guess all's well that ends well, at least in this case. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you've all had a fantastic weekend. And as always, take care. And I'll catch you next time.